Okay, we're going to get started here. There's some seats here, and there's some chairs over there in the back if you want to spread them out. If you get a chair in the back, just please put it back when you're done. Welcome to Video Game Makers Unite. I'm Burns Holloman. We've been doing, in August this will be 3 years, but it's not August yet, but you know,
It's not even really close to August.
2.5.
But, you know.
Yeah, we're coming in on it. How many of you have been here before? Okay, good. Yeah, there's usually, the crowd changes depending on who the speaker is. Good draw right here. So I just want to cover a few things quickly. The first thing we do is just call it people looking and announcements. So people looking is, I'm looking for a job, or I'm looking for some, I don't know, texture people, or people know Shader and Unity, or I'm looking for my next life partner, or I'm looking to hire someone, and we've had people get jobs out of here. So that's one thing you can do. It's a free fire zone. You can do whatever you want. The other thing is just announcements, and we'll have one in a second. But before we do the announcement, anyone looking or, yeah?
I'm hiring.
There you go.
All right.
Did
So
we
it's my-
deliver or what?
It's my first time here. I'm Brian. I have a company, actually at a Capital Factory called Pop-Up Play. And we use Unity to create this basically Google version of Google SketchUp for kids about 5 years old, actually from 4 to 7. So they design their own custom playhouse, and then we manufacture it and send it to their house. So you can go to popupplaytoy.com and see what it looks like. Anyhow, I'm hiring a Unity developer. It's not really a game because there's no score, you can't die or anything. But we use Unity to make this really cool tool. So if you're interested in making awesome stuff for kids, we're working on some AR things too. So the Euphoria experience, that's a plus. You can either email yay, Y-A-Y, at popupplaytoy.com, or you can catch me here. Again, my name is Brian. So thanks.
Anyone else? Yeah.
Hi, I'm Cindy. I'm an AI level designer at Incubator, and we do video games and simulations for the military. And we're working on a first-person shooter right now in Unreal, and we're looking for AI programmers and technical artists or animators. So come find me after.
And where are you at again?
Incubator. Yeah, it's basically a smaller company to a larger entity, Cubic, that works on military.
Well, we were just talking, I was saying, why aren't there any military simulation companies in town?
We're here.
Because the Defense Logistics Agency a few years ago got up and did a big pitch that I heard, and they're spending $5 billion a year on just simulation stuff. So
Yeah, there's a lot of money in it, and we're
Right.
looking for people with Unreal experience.
and it's government money. It's obscenely large and
Traceable.
yeah. We're all paying for it.
So yeah, just come find me after.
Yeah. Okay, that's great. Wow. Anyone else? Yeah.
See, my name is Kyle Garner from Megaworld Studios. We've got need for some programming. We're approaching alpha. We're in the optimization phase. And we're going to be pitching at GDC, so I need a little bit of help with the getting this thing polished up just a smidge.
Okay, great.
Art would be nice too.
I'm Justin Sheeper. I'm a character artist, and I'm about to graduate from the Art Institute of Boston, and just looking for a position around town. Proficient in ZBrush, 3ds Max, Unity, and I'm really good for topology, texturing skills, and yeah, about to graduate, looking for something. So
Good.
find me if you're interested.
Good. We're getting, this is really amazing. Got some jobs here and some people. Yeah.
Hey, Andrew Nguyen, game designer, looking for opportunities around town. Previous experience at Kings Isle, Nexon, and
Wow.
Spark Unlimited in California. So just came back in town. Got a current beat now, but looking for something new. So
Dungeon Fighter. How many? Just crazy number of users back in the day. Nexon. Anyone else? Yeah.
Hey, I'm Wayne. I like to party. Actually, I'm a kick-ass IT guy. I'm getting laid off at a local company. Used to work at EA and Certain Affinity. Looking for the next big thing. So, if you know anybody looking for kick-ass IT guys who like to party, let me know.
Anyone else? Anyone else? Okay, over to, it's time to talk about GameCon. Oh, here you are. I was looking for you. Get your,
What's going on, everybody? I'm going to make this real quick because you're not here for me. But something just got announced in the last couple of days. So before Captivate, before GDC Online, there was GameCon, Austin GameCon, and that's something that went for a number of years. I think it was like 2003 to 2007, and then they went to GDC Online, and then it's kind of been dormant, but they're bringing it back. And right now, that's all we know. If you are interested, it's going to be September 21st. And if you want more information, or if you want to get information when things come in, presenters, sponsors, the location is locked. It will be at the Austin Convention Center. So if you want more info, it's austingamecon.com. If you go here, this will get updated pretty regularly, but don't be afraid of this button for register, because all this really is if you want more info, put in your email address, and then as things come up, you'll just get notified. And that's it. I'm out.
well, that was very efficient. Yeah, so another game conference. Another game conference.
Someone's gonna see my ass.
How many people are going to GDC? Okay, good. Okay, so anything else? People looking? Oh, I have one actually for a change. I've got an office out at Austin Studios. If someone needs to, we're trying to rent out a desk or so. So if you're interested, we've got free parking, we've got Wi-Fi, we have Google cars. The self-driving Google cars are down 2 studios down from us, and we have Rooster Teeth to the left. And all sorts of interesting people doing auditions outside the office, because there's a lot of casting agencies in the red building. So if you're interested, let me know. This app, Meetup app, is on the App Store. Parking, if you parked in the garage downstairs, just so you know for future, if you go out to the desk, they'll give you this magic get out of jail thing, which makes $20 or $15, $5 to park down there. If you brought your single sprocket bike, you can chain them up down there for free. Oh, this is shameless promoting. We don't make money on this, but we've got a podcast called Game of Games. And our own Gordon Walton and Todd Coleman were on the first show, and we just finished a really interesting interview with Greg Zajac, who's the co-founder of BioWare, little company. And he's retired, and he's gone back to Canada to make beer with his billions of dollars. I mean, he's literally starting a beer company in Edmonton, Canada. So we've just finished that one up, and that'll be up on the thing. And then the third one we're doing is with Kelly Santiago, who, that game company won every GDC Indie Award, and they did Journey. And we're going to talk to her about the early years. And that's in fact what we talked to Greg about, was how they started BioWare. We didn't get into any of the content stuff, because there are plenty of people that do that. But check it out on the App Store. You have to really look for it, and it's there. And then after this, we haven't really done any networking stuff. So after this, we're going to start doing it. We've done it once, and it was kind of, a few people kind of showed up. But this space is obviously good for that. So we're going to be down at Buffalo Billiards after this. It takes 2 minutes to get there. Oh, this is Game of Games. Forgot to mention, when you leave here, and we have to be out of this room at 9 o'clock, we just have to, because all the people that give us this space for free have to go home. And when we're hanging around, we're keeping them from going home. And the other thing is, so leave the room, like line the seats up like you're in the military, even if you never have been and you never plan to. Okay, just line them up neat. Pick up cups, garbage. It's a really big deal.
There's a simulation for that now.
Yeah, exactly. In fact, we're not really here. This is my avatar. Okay, so this is Buffalo Billiards. It's just down, if you go out of the building, it's down, this is Brazos. And It's right there, 6th Street, and you can't miss it. And there's pool tables, and it's a big space, so you can get to know each other a little bit. You show up there. Okay, I think that, let me see if I got everything here. Yeah. I think we're good. Okay, so what I want to do quickly, what I'm trying to do, have you noticed like maybe it's because I've been addicted to podcasts, and all the NPR reporters can't start a sentence without saying so. So it turns out, that's like an NPR type thing. So I'm trying to stop saying that. It's like saying like. Dallas is here from QC Games. And that's why a lot of you are here. There's a really big crowd, and the crowd size is always based on who's talking. So this is an SRO crowd, which is really great. And without further ado, I'm just going to let you introduce yourself, and you can trip on yourself or whatever you want to do.
a little trip to Chevy Chase century. Chevy Chase was a comedian back in the 1980s for some of you.
Leave the Nobel Prize. That's a little over.
I'll do that.
Yeah.
I want to
The
learn.
Academy Awards is okay, but don't get into the.
I can do that. Yeah, and I want to learn more about what it means to be looking for your next life partner, because that kind of, I feel like if it's a life partner, that should be a life partner. But it's interesting that you brought that up. So, hi everybody. I'm Dallas Dickinson. I'm the president of QC Games. We're fairly new. We started up in about June of last year, and I put together like the world's most like in-depth 2-slide or 3-slide presentation here that I'm going to put up here, and the content is completely meaningless, but it's kind of to give me a framework. So hey, who we are, look, it's pictures you guys didn't expect to see of yourselves. Awesome. Some of my team is here tonight. So we are a group of folks, some of whom have been in the industry for a very long time, working for various larger, usually online game companies. I myself came from Sony Online back in the olden times. We have some folks from NCSoft, from Mythic Entertainment. We've been making online games for quite a while. A significant portion of our team, right now we're about 30, and so this percentage gets smaller and smaller as we grow larger and larger, but a significant number of us worked on Star Wars: The Old Republic. So I would talk about us as much of the leadership of Star Wars: The Old Republic has moved on to create this new studio. We did it for a number of reasons, and again, I've mentioned a couple of these studios, but a lot of our story has to do with where we came from, and I don't want to denigrate any specific entity that's up here on the board, but there is a lot about the cultures in which we worked for, and some of us, more than a decade, that we didn't really find to be the best for us as artists, that we thought was actually optimal or suboptimal for the players. It was not very good for just work-life balance, which I know is a cliched thing to bring up, but the general culture. The businesses, I don't think were necessarily run very well or altogether well at all. And so as an impetus to found our company, there were a whole lot of things that we've done incorrectly, that we've made as huge mistakes in projects we've worked on in the past, and that we decided that we needed to correct. I'm going to make a lot of reference to Star Wars: The Old Republic, mostly because it's the biggest and most recent thing that a lot of us worked on together, but I don't use that as a thing that I'm trying to poke at so much as I think an example that we all see in the industry, especially when you're working for larger and larger companies. Some of you may know the approximate numbers of what it took to create Star Wars: The Old Republic. I don't think I'm supposed to ever disclose exactly how much it cost, but I can tell you how many people it took to ship that game. In the end, it was over 500 people working on a game, and that's batshit crazy. It was a position we found ourselves backed into. I can come up with 1,000 reasons why we did it that way, and we got the damn thing out the door, and hurrah! But the cultural damage that trying to run a project that large, trying to create a team that big, the cultural damage of that, not just to us as people, but I think to the way that the game was made, to what the players got to experience in the end, was actually palpable. And because of that, there were a lot of failures to that game. Now, truth be told, it's doing very well now. The game, many of us were involved in this as well, turning it around over really the year after it launched and turning it into a highly successful game. But culturally, it was a nightmare. And a lot of that had to do with some of the things that are founding tenets for our company. There was very little empowerment of the people developing the project. Most people, and this is even up at the leadership levels, were hamstrung from making decisions. And there were many reasons for that. But the major one is it's a very large company. It's a very large company working on a very large IP that happens to be owned by somebody else. And so if you were a frontline developer, if you're a person whose job it is to actually put the work in, put the pixels on the screen, put the game systems into the code, you were many layers disconnected from what was happening. You might have opinions. Those opinions, and I say this bluntly, didn't matter. Whatever your ideas were, they might even be really good ideas, and there was no time to take them in. There was no time to work on them. We fell into, because we had to get this thing out, hell or high water, a practice that I'll take responsibility for. The decisions in the end, during the final year, all went through one office that I named the Death Star, because I'm an idiot, and I make things sound as scary as possible. But it was that. It was a room where hope went to die. Any developer on the project could say, hey, there's something we're doing in this major system in the game, or this major piece of content in the game, and it's crazy. And I would let them come in, I would hear them out and say, thanks, we're not doing that. Go back and get your stuff done. And that didn't feel good to anybody. What it led to were these, we call them ivory towers when we kind of do our own processing about what happened. Groups worked together. They had responsibility for a small piece, and that's all they could hold on to, and therefore they couldn't feel responsible and empowered to make decisions about anything larger than that. And if we gave someone feedback on something that affected their thing and they could point to anybody else, they would. And so everybody was doing this. If there was a problem, it's not my fault. My code is working. It's not my fault. My system is working. The content is what broke it. Vice versa. The content is fine, but the engineers made a change. Huge amounts of pointing this way and that way. Huge amounts of defensiveness come out of this. People not only weren't willing to take criticism, but because they saw how that was dealt with, they weren't willing to give criticism. And as I said, the Death Star was the worst example of that. You give me feedback and I will tell you to go fuck off. Even if your idea is great, because we had to get this thing done. All sorts of becauses, but a small group of us was allowed to work on a smaller project for a period of time. And we got to try and fix a whole lot of those cultural problems. The project never actually saw the light of day, but we got to operate as a smaller team, essentially a startup mentality. There were, at the beginning, about 10 or 15 of us working on this project. We got to have ownership over the overall design, over the technology decisions to some degree, over the way in which we could operate and how we gave feedback. And it was this beautiful, refreshing blast of air to people who'd been in that place for a long time. That core is the founding core of QC Games. And so when we came over and were able to start up our project, I guess I'm sort of pretending like, oh, you guys have all read our website. You haven't read our website. So we have actually partnered with a publisher, Nexon, one that was mentioned earlier. They're a pretty big Korean publisher. They are making forays into the West, and you may have heard they've made a couple of deals with Western developers. But they are the ones who kind of afforded us this opportunity to get this, again, great core team, but then start growing the team. The slide before that had people's pictures on it, it's not just old guys who worked on MMOs for the last decade. There are people very new to the industry, very young to the industry. We're attempting to take in as many perspectives as possible, and then foster the kind of culture where feedback, open criticism, respectfully given, is actually expected, because it's actually the way that we all grow as developers, it's the way we all grow as artists. If you come in and you have thin skin and you can't take criticism, it doesn't matter how good you are, you're not going to get better. And again, not to name names, but we worked with a lot of people who fell into that category. It's a very large project, but there were some people who, we've all heard this phrase, rock star developers, right? All of us want to be rock star developers, we want to be considered that. People are like, that person, he's a rock star, she's a rock star, she's amazing. The person who can, in theory, do like 10x, this is a phrase that production people talk about, like, is that a 10x contributor? That person is a 10x contributor. A lot of times, 10x contributors are poison. They are people who cannot take criticism. They know how good they are, but that means they're not open to learning more and are open to taking feedback. And so we have explicitly, not that the team is not made up of people who are also rock stars, they're also very, very talented, but if you're a rock star and a jerk, we're not going to hire you. If you're close to a rock star but a really, really mature adult human being, holy crap, are we going to want to hire you, and we want to bring you into this culture. So how we run our studio. This is the only bullet point or the only slide I put any thought really into. So we hire grown-ups. It's a thing that I actually put on the website, and then I was told that sounded scary and creepy, and so I took it off the website. But it actually is. It's kind of a core tenet. It's something that I talk to any candidate that we bring in about our mentality. What we want in our team, and again, you don't have to have gray hair in order to be a grown-up. You have to be somebody who is willing to do all of the things that I've been talking about, to respectfully give criticism, feel comfortable giving criticism, take criticism, and understand that you are not your code, you are not your artwork, you are part of this team that is trying to create a greater thing. And we want everybody from the most junior person to the most senior person to be at that point in the discussion on a level playing field. Now that doesn't mean that we're a socialist autonomous collective or whatever, that there is no decision making. Decision making still happens because part of responsibility is also your level of seniority does carry with it some responsibility. So, I am at the end of the day the single wringable neck if our company fails. Our creative director, and I'm going to point him out and make him feel uncomfortable. Gabe, who's at the back there. Gabe is in charge of making a great game that players really want to play. He's not solely responsible for that, but when it comes to making a decision, are we going left or are we going right? Gabe's there who's going to make that decision, and I'm going to back him unless I have a big concern about it, and we talk about it openly. Hiring grown-ups is actually harder than you think in not just this industry, in any creative industry. We are all brought up to think that we are special snowflake genius flowers who are going to be the next you're going to be the next President Obama. You're also going to be the next the guy who made Sarah Palin. Thank you. James Cameron is where I was going with that, but Sarah Palin is someone's James Cameron.
I feel like I'm feeling like you're not taking my constructive criticism.
I may not be right now.
Okay.
But again, this also wraps up into this empowerment and responsibility. We want everyone, and this is something like the example we can use very clearly is with engineers. We want an engineer to own a system. It's not just the UI implementation of this system. It is the game logic implementation of the system. It is the client server implementation of this system. It is actually making sure that the back end is supportable and scalable. It is making sure that the networking layer of it is actually optimized. Like all of that, the holistic system, because we want people to actually feel pride of ownership, but also know that if something's going wrong with our inventory system, we need to know who to talk to. And it's not who to blame, it is who to talk to and ask them, like, what's going on, we need you to investigate. But the same is true with design. We want designers to own entire systems or entire classes of gameplay or entire map levels. We need that because that's the only way you can actually have responsibility. It's the only way people can actually feel empowered that their feedback makes a difference. And then finally, I've hit on this a number of times, respect and feedback. Being a thin-skinned developer is the worst thing you can possibly be. This is a weird world we're living in. Entertainment is not science. There's a lot of science there to it, but it means that your best guess may be completely wrong. Your best guess may be 90% right, but it still doesn't mean you commit to it. You have to hear feedback. You have to see what players do. You have to hear what other people who have different perspectives do. Within our studio, the type of game, as far as we've talked about, we're not disclosing our game exactly, but what we've talked about is we're making a game. It has online elements, not a shock to anybody who knows what we've made in the past, and it has co-op elements. There are people in our studio who don't primarily play co-op online games, and I love that. I love the fact that we might have players who play puzzle games, that players who play classic adventure games, that people who play shooters, people who play MOBAs, people who play RPGs, people who play all across the map as their primary gameplay style. But all of those perspectives are actually valuable to us creating the best possible game, because there are things that all genres of game do better than others. And if you can take a tiny bit out of something that comes out from outside of your particular genre, and again, I apologize for keeping pointing to Gabe as you know the linchpin here, but Gabe is really good at a certain class of games, but he's not closed-minded to ideas that come outside of his particular experience, and that's the way that everybody in this studio is meant to operate. Now, there is the question of, are we nailing that thus far? We've been operating for a little bit over 6 months, and hopefully we're doing pretty well with that. But it's an open conversation. You know, to the whole point of maturity and being open to feedback, I'm also open to that feedback amongst the team to say, hey, are we actually hitting these goals? Is our culture what we want it to be? Our development philosophy maps to everything that we said there. So I don't want to go through this too deeply, but ownership. You have to own what you've done, and you have to have enough empowerment within that to feel like you can own what you've done. If you're just doing what I told you to do, it's very hard for you to feel ownership when I say, and that was wrong. You told me to do that, man. Like, I'm doing the exact thing you said, and now you're telling me that it sucks. We try not to do that. Constant playtesting. Again, this is maybe just trite. This is what everybody should be doing, but if you're not actually playing your game all the time, you have no idea where you're going. And then finally, and this is also maybe standard practices, but you'd be surprised how many groups that I've worked with over my career where that is actually not what people do, solving the big problems first. Leaving the ones that are really, really, really scary till later on, because you're like, everything else though, we should just get everything else running and then we'll figure out how to solve that problem. That's a terrible idea. It's a recipe for disaster. So that is who we are. That is what we intend to do. I didn't raise my hand earlier because we're hiring, and I had a slide, so I don't want to waste that slide. So we actually are hiring right now. You don't need to raise your hand and throw your resume at me right now, but feel free to reach out this afternoon, evening, whatever it's turned into when it's dark outside, down at Buffalo Billiards. If any of these things either fit somebody that you know, let us know. We will be hiring more over the next few months, but these are the open job recs as of today, or one of them's not even listed today, so you guys have a sneak peek on it. But that's where we are right now. We continue to grow, and we're building a pretty big game. I think something we haven't announced, but that we can finally, like we're working in Unreal. So it's a pretty cool engine, pretty cool technology. Those of you who have experience with it. And I have a bunch of people here in the studio, so I think we're going to kind of go to a Q&A. If you have questions for me, but if you have questions that are more technical, my tech director and CTO is here, my chief creative officer is here, COO and finance person, if you want to know about that stuff, like who wants to know about that stuff, but you might, you're a valuable person. I value you in every way.
That stinks.
I know.
That goes back to your grown-up economy.
Exactly.
Actually running a business.
Running a business.
You might have to do that.
Well, and this is my, like, it's not something that everyone can do, but to compliment you here a little bit. If you're starting up a company and you don't have anybody who's an actual grown-up who knows how money works, it's a terrible idea. It is a terrible idea. I kind of half-assed know how money works, and having a person who is focused on that, and it doesn't have to be their full-time job, but someone who really, really understands the operational aspect of a business is hugely important. And it's the one thing that I want anybody who is thinking of starting something up on their own to think about. So even if you can't afford to hire that person, you need to, in your mind, know that half of your day has to be with that mindset. If you don't do it, terrible things happen. That's all I got. That's my shtick. Questions? Yes?
You're talking about the people that make up your company are some people that have been doing it for a while, and also some people that are fresh to the industry, young to the industry. What is it like when you talk to those people? What is it like bringing them in and meshing those two different experience levels with people that, I'm sure they have a fresh take on ideas compared to the people that have been doing it for a while, but how do those two mesh, and what do you look for, and like, what is that like?
How does it work, Wilson? I'm putting poor Wilson on the spot. Wilson is someone that we just hired this fall, fresh out of Denia Sam's, or so he'd just been in that. You'd done your own games in an independent way before that, but this is your first like big industry job in theory. So. And so we've tried to bring Wilson in, have him pair up with more senior people, with Gabe and with some of his senior guys. But I'd love to hear your take on it.
Yeah, sure. I'll just stand up. So a lot of people here.
So yeah, I mean, I think one of the cool things, and it kind of goes back to what Dallas was saying, is just that it is like kind of this open culture of feedback. Is, you know, there is sometimes, you know, I'm coming at like a problem or an idea from a different perspective than someone who's more experienced than I am, but because it's an open culture, you know, they're open to that new perspective, and maybe, you know, I'm bringing something new to the table that's exciting, or maybe it's something that, you know, they've made a pitfall mistake on in the past, and they're like, hey, you know, I've had experience with this. They're able to give me that feedback, and because it's a culture of, you know, not that like I'm strictly better than you because of this. It's more like, you know, I want to help you understand why, you know, I made this mistake in the past, or something like that. So I guess the whole idea of, you know, sharing the ownership in the game, and you know, all the creative work that happens. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, you know, it's nice. I feel like I'm kind of equal playing field with people I'm working with, even though they have, you know, a totally different set of experience than I do. So.
Yeah, I mean, the theory behind it, it's hopefully fairly clear, but the best thing for us as a company, for this particular game, but also for the future, is, you know, it took Gabe, and I'm gonna keep pointing to Gabe, you know, it took Gabe 15 years in the industry to become who he is as a designer. And a lot of that has to do with who Gabe is and how hard he worked himself in the face of, because I know some of the people he's worked for, some pretty weird mentoring. You know, that there's, I'm not naming any names. Same is true of me in my career. Like we have a very odd industry that we still aren't actually through our adolescence, but go 10 years ago, and adolescence is the kindest word I can use for how the industry was run. And our goal is, I would love Wilson to be caught up with Gabe in 1 year. That's what you have. That's it. That's the deadline. No, but like the only way to bring someone up to speed is actually to put them on as level of playing field as you possibly can. To know that when we're giving feedback on a build, on a, you know, that Wilson's voice is valued just as much as my voice, as Gabe's voice, as anybody else in the rooms, because you have to embrace all of that. And even when you give the feedback, as you said, like, even if it's a pitfall that you've run into, like, tone is really important. You know, someone says, "Oh, I did that before and it's the worst idea in the world." That's very different from, "Oh, you know what? I totally understand why you think that, and I understand the idea behind it, and the idea behind it is a good thing, but the implementation that you're talking about to fix the problem is something that I've done in the past, and it didn't work out as I had intended." And I'm making up an example, but that aspect of tone and maturity is something that our senior people have to embrace in order to make sure that what we're doing with our more junior folks is impactful. Yes?
Is that done in a kind of a formal process, or is that more of a kind of like a hey, pat on the back as they're walking past the guy's computer or something?
The only place it's been formalized is when we have open discussion after play tests. So that's a place where it happens on a sort of semi-rigorous basis. But the idea is, and this is the thing that, you know, in actual practice, it may not happen every time, but it's what we want to be, the casual interaction as well. To say, I'm working on this thing right now, and I have a question. I mean, it's another sort of tagline that I didn't put up there, but because, you know, I put up as many cliches as I could. This is one that's, you know, one bridge too far for me. But like, we don't want anyone to suffer in silence, and we don't want anyone to think that there's a dumb question or that they will be judged for asking a dumb question. That we would much rather you raise your hand and say, "I'm drowning," than that you drown and pull us over the boat as well. And in certain cultures, I think that, you know, I felt this way. I can, you know, speaking from my own career path. I felt, boy, if I let anybody know that things are going to hell right now, it's going to reflect badly on me. So I'm going to have to hold it tight and try and fix it as best I can, and, you know, scramble to cover it. But then, you know, to try and actually fix the problem, but in a very paranoid type way, whereas we want everyone to be able to say, "I have no idea how to do that. You just asked me to do something. I do not know how to do that, and maybe I should, but you're not going to fire me for saying I don't know how to do that. You're going to say, 'Oh gosh, you know how to do that. Well, let's work on that.'" And you know, that is what we try to do, not just formally, not just casually, but both.
You know, if I can add there, we do formal, informal, and semi-formal as well.
Semi-formal.
Yeah.
So basically, we have after a play test, we get together and everyone kind of goes around and they talk about the bugs they saw as well as what feedback they might have. And then following that, if there's like a recurring bit of feedback, I'll invite whoever wants to attend to talk about it in depth. And that's sort of the sort of ad lib kind of semi-formal things as well that we do. And it seems to work well. It's fun, and it's great to get perspective from other disciplines as well on design issues and that sort of stuff. I don't know, Brian, if you do that, if there's any coding issues, and you want to bring in artists for opinions on that
Generally,
stuff.
no.
No, it doesn't work that way.
We are gonna start doing code reviews with artists, so.
No, but for design, it works well with cross disciplines because, of course, at the same time, we're all consumers.
Right, it allows you to express like your passion. There may be some aspect of the game that I don't personally care about, and so we don't need to have the whole group talking about that thing, or I don't need to be a part of that particular conversation, me personally. But if there are 3 people who are really, really passionate about the way that this looks in the game or the way that this feels in the game, then they can have that kind of more focused conversation afterwards. Yes.
Have you had any like really interesting interactions between people who are maybe like maybe less experienced members of your team who maybe give certain ideas that are much like that are very well that are taken very well by the more experienced people, or people from, like you say, who works typically in other genres of games who give like really more insightful observations on what's like on the way the project is going?
I don't know that I can give a specific instance. I don't know if Dave, you have one that's.
I mean, I can, but I'm trying to figure out how to do it without saying what.
Yeah.
But like Wilson's brought up a number of things that's been like, oh wait, yeah, we all took it for granted because we're so used to doing this, and it just shed a new light on it. It sort of brought a group together, an engineer as well. I'm speaking in code a little bit here, Wilson, so you know which topic I'm talking about. And then sort of just got everyone's different ideas at that point, because he saw it as an issue, and we all took it for granted, and that sort of brought attention to it, and then we started to kind of beat up the idea that was there, and then.
Yeah, I mean, I can make up something that may or may not have happened, in that a number of us, Gabe and I specifically, like we've been making MMOs for a while, and we've been making different kinds of MMOs, but there are a lot of the trappings of a massive multiplayer online game that are they're weird sacred cows within that space, and they're things that we take for granted as that's just the way things should operate. And in some cases, like they're terrible ideas. They are the opposite of fun. Again, this is doing some of my back in my day, but like EverQuest at the time was an awesome game. And I loved it, and I loved every aspect of it. And we can all point to our friends at Blizzard, as Blizzard looked at what was done, not just in EverQuest, but in the other larger MMOs that existed before that time, and said, I'm gonna take about 20 of those sacred cows and I'm gonna shoot them in the head. And we, as the people who were the holders of the chalice at the time, were like, no, grinding is what everything should be about. You should die to rats forever. That's the most important part of a video game, is dying to a rat. And they changed that, and so we haven't killed all those sacred cows. We're not making, just to be clear, we're not making an MMO, but because it's the thing that that I certainly have the most experience in, and Gabe has the most experience in. We think that we're aware of the things that we're not doing, but having a fresh perspective, Wilson's, and there are a couple other folks who were sort of in the Wilson's category of this is their first or their maybe second industry job. Having them say, that's not the way that this game works, and us saying, oh, you're actually right, and that's actually better. So let's talk about that. Yes.
All right. You mentioned that team culture and like overall team health and how everyone interacts with each other is very critical, to the team and to the business. And I was curious, what changed in the last year, whether it be a business change, a technology change, has had the most positive impact with the team and has produced more output?
Boy, again, we've only been operating for 6 or 7 months, and the first month or two, it was like me and Brian and 2 engineers and 3 engineers. So I'm not sure if there was any specific thing that we've learned in the last year. I will say that that this is I mean, it's kind of everything I've been talking about, but this much tighter iteration loop of but it's a practice more than it is it's not a technology per se.
Right.
It is a much quicker getting something to a consumable state, so that we can all get the feel of it, and you know, we can't just check it off and be like, well, that's done now, we're moving on. But that was a practice that, and you know, and I forgive me, because the games I've worked on have been like these weird, ridiculous MMO type games. Like, the saddest thing about MMOs is you have no idea if they're fun until about 5 minutes before you ship them, because it has like all of these spidered systems that they all interconnect, and you can fool yourself, I should say, into thinking that you don't know it's fun until it's shippable, because you're like, wow, everything is going to be awesome though once we have hats in the game.
Right.
But the hats aren't there yet, and so nobody should judge any of this. And so, you know, we've deliberately, in what we're doing, not just as a game, but then in our practice, we've tried to, again, take the big challenges first. You know, have this sort of prototype mentality all the time, where not to the point of wasted work. Like, I think that's another place that people can go that is a waste of time and a you know, terrible endless suck of resources and time.
Right.
But we try to do the work the real way, and we try to iterate it on it quickly. And it's just a different way of operating than I'm used to. It's maybe not new to everybody in this room, but sure is new to me. You had a question?
It's perfect, actually. It was kind of dovetailing on the finding the fun. And I was wondering, do you have any process in place? You've mentioned a little bit your internal play testing process. Do you have any kind of external play testing process in place, and is that related at all to your marketing efforts?
So we have yet to do what we've called tissue testing. The game honestly isn't in a place for that yet. I will caution against doing that too early. It is something that everybody wants, and no offense to the marketing people in the room, but the fucking marketing people want to do that. And if you do it too early, you are going to give yourself so much bad data. It's something actually that Gabe and I thought about, because I used to try and support the marketing people, and I was wrong, Gabe. I'm admitting in front of all of these people that I was wrong. That showing something, because we're game developers, we maybe are able to say, okay, I understand that this thing is only 10% there, and I can project out the other 90%. We're actually not as good at it as we think we are, but we're at least okay at it. We are 1,000 times better than a person who's never worked in the industry. Doesn't matter how much of a gamer they are. They could play every game in the world. And you'll see this every once in a while in threads, you probably all follow various games on Reddit when date slip and all that sort of stuff, and then someone who clearly has never worked in games say like, that's stupid, it should have added all of these features, and that would only take a week. Or like they just make these like crazy proclamations about like, well, they're wasting all their time and money. It's way, way harder than that, and that person, the tissue tester that you get on, and it's nothing against them, it's just they don't have the experience to know just how hard the thing is that they're missing, and they also don't know the thing that they don't see is really, really easy to do, and so that's why it's not there, and they can't see the game for that thing that's missing. And so I would caution you against that. If that's the environment you work in, or if that's the kind of game that you're working on. Sometimes you can't resist it, sometimes it is forced upon you, but we are trying to hold off until we have something that is a more coherent. Yeah, the vertical slice is the industry term, but we want to have a very coherent vertical slice before we put it in the hands of anybody, so that they don't have to say, wait a minute, there are no animations in this game, which would be a terrible thing to have. But like I can't imagine this game without animations, but they'd probably be right in that case. Yes.
So asking for a friend who's in marketing.
Yes. We don't judge anybody. We love everyone.
At what stage do you think is okay to kind of have that outside playtesting? Is like alpha enough or beta?
Well, those words can have 1,000 different definitions. So the thing I think is valuable earlier on for marketing, and this is me talking about marketing as if I know what I'm talking about, but things that have nothing to do with the actual gameplay, the ideas of the game, just getting that kind of consumer feedback, what do people think sounds interesting. It's directional. It's also, it can be dangerous data because people could be like, well, I just played GTA, and therefore everyone should have like murdering hookers. That should be a feature in your game. And you're like, that's not my game. My game's My Little Pony game. So, so that can be dangerous, but I think that there's some value there. I think you really have to have, the definition that Gabe and I use of a vertical slice is you don't have to have every system in the game. And my definition of alpha is every system in the game. Doesn't mean, it means not all the content. Every system in the game is there for alpha. You can go before that if the systems that aren't in the game are ones you wouldn't experience or require in the 15 minutes it takes for you to do a playtest, right? So, as an MMO example, guilds. There is no way for you to test guilds anyway in that in a 15-minute thing. So you don't need to have guilds in if you're going to do your sort of gameplay testing, your tissue testing. But you do need to have the full combat loop, the full loot progression loop, all of the interaction, grouping with other players, like all of that stuff needs to be there, and it needs to be at some level of fidelity. Doesn't have to be final art, but boy, you'd be surprised how much people notice, especially again, the tissue tester that I keep describing, the person who was just a gamer, no industry experience, a slightly temporary texture on a character, people will notice, and it will color everything that they see of the game. So you need to have a very focused experience. You probably need to have whatever your form of on-ramping is, the tutorial experience, whatever that is. That's something that is worth testing. Again, I say in the land of MMO, we had a lot of trouble even showing because there is no 5 minutes of an MMO that's fun. And I say that thinking that MMOs are intensely fun, right? Like I've been making these games for a long, long time, but we would go to trade shows. We're like, what are we gonna do at the trade show? People were like, just put them on a planet. and that was, and so we would have people kind of standing over the shoulders, and it's a trade show, and so people were like, what is WASD? And we're like, oh shit, you don't even know how to move. And so, we tried to do all sorts of things with the Old Republic of like, mostly we did like very tight PvP content to be like, look, you at least know that you're punching somebody in the face and they're punching you back and you win or you lose. But if you don't have a nice smooth on-ramp experience, you're also going to get weird feedback. You try to filter for that when you're getting people who are testers. You're like, how experienced are you really in games? People are like, I play all the time. I play 80 hours a week. Really, do you? And they come in, they don't know what how to move. So it's dangerous. It's just something you have to. I don't know if there's a cure for it. You need to do it at some point, but you need to have as tight an experience as possible.
It's funny thing actually to add to that. It's not like if you do these things, it's always the bad feedback. Because like for example, we tested something without an onboarding experience, but basically Dallas and I said, oh, here's the onboarding experience, and this is how you play the game. This is what you do, and then we got all positive feedback because they just wanted to be nice to us. So it's like, so it's like, well, maybe they didn't. Maybe it was actually that awesome.
They didn't want to be nice to you, Gabe.
So it's a funny thing. If you can't have like sort of a clean environment and that on ramp and then the basic loop, it's really tough to get anything valuable out of it. You have to extract and make assumptions even in taking the data. It's all assumptions in that.
Well, and I guess that is. I'm going to restate what you just said because it's what I do and I know it's annoying. But the some people will project like the worst possible experience, and some people will project the best. Some people will be like, well, I didn't see any of this in the game, but I know you're going to have this, and so I'm so excited about this game. and like they'll write up 5 paragraphs on why they think this is the best game in the world, and you look at it and you're like, we're not going to do any of that. But I'm glad they liked it. They made our net promoter score look better, and therefore the marketing people stopped talking to me. So that was great.
Hey, Dallas?
Yes.
One of the things we've had a whole bunch of people through here, there's this new thing which is, it's even more that it's community management on steroids, right? It's you've got all of these guys like Cloud Imperium, Gordon's doing it with Crowfall, Richard's doing it with Shroud, where it's much more than testing, right?
Yeah.
Your fan base is literally building the game with you, and they seem to spend as much time on the video channel talking to their fan base as much as anything else, and it's a really interesting model. I mean, Chris Roberts has taken it to outer space with $100 million or whatever, and still going. What do you think of that model?
I think it depends entirely on the game you're making. It's something that Gordon and I actually have had, spirited disagreements about, and I love to have a spirited disagreement with Gordon. But I actually understand it entirely for his game. My sense, and forgive me for, I make assumptions whenever I see how people are developing games, but when I look at Crowfall as an example, and the same as I think is true of Cloud Imperium, the games they're making, there is a core of that gameplay audience who they are cultivating, who are evangelists for that game, and that is not just what the game is. The game is for those people, but it's what the business model is, right? The business model is for those players, and therefore I think it can make sense to do that. It's a lot of work. Those games that you've mentioned, they're essentially live right now. It depended, whether or not they even have an active gameplay beta going on. And so they're already doing the thing that anybody who's running a live service is having to do. They are having to actively manage that. But I think it can pay off if the market that you're going for, you can really define and you can capture their imagination. I think that, and this is not to say that we're necessarily making like a broad market game per se. I think we're still also going to go for a very focused and targeted market. But our game is smaller in terms of what the feature set's going to be. Those games that you were describing, they kind of have a very large feature set, and so the dream of what each and every one of those features is going to be, I think, actually can sustain your audience even if they're not quite in the game yet. And therefore it can work. If we were to try and do that with our game, people want to see the most important part of the game and they want to touch it. And we can't start talking about our game until you can touch it. Because if you can't touch it, you're going to lose interest, and and we don't intend to try and sustain year-long, multiple year-long, 4-year-long in the case of Cloud Imperium, interest from our fans. Because that's not the game we're making. The game that we're making is something that I think you're going to want to play in order to have any opinion on it. Is that
it's
kind of a half
another
answer?
way. Another way that maybe this bridges some of what you're saying is like with Shroud of the Avatar, for example. I mean, there's this built-in fan base of Ultima. Like I'm a huge fan of the Ultima series. I've got framed certificates on my wall. I'm a total geek about it. And I want to know what's next, and I want to be involved in hearing that stuff. Whereas if a new game comes out that doesn't have this like history or this like community almost with it, and there's innovation to it and stuff, it's like I want to see what it all is and then be able to capture it and feel it myself. It's a lot easier than trying to bridge the gap of like, well, how does this work? How does this work? No, just put your hands on the whole thing here because this is new, as opposed to like an MMO from pre-existing kind of worlds and systems and stuff like that.
Yeah, and I don't want to, and I'm not disagreeing with you. Like, I think what we're kind of saying, both Gabe and I, but I don't want to call the other games not innovative because I know they're actually doing some very innovative things. But they're innovating within a known space. They're innovating within stuff that we can all latch onto, we can imagine. And I guess what I'm saying about our game is we think we're innovating in a way where there isn't an easy analog. And therefore, for us, it's way more important that we get it right before we put it out there.
And a little bit more of this there to be fair. This is all just waxing poetic. This is just
speculation, right?
Yeah, it's speculation. It's like who knows what's right. I mean, one of the other things that kind of throws me with the long build-ups is that the long build-ups and those expectations. It's something we experience on Star Wars: The Old Republic, and that's another thing that we kind of swing the pendulum just philosophically ourselves. Is because we built up so much expectation and just so much. It's like the game just got bigger than was ever possible on any development studio.
Yeah, no.
Even 500 people.
Right, exactly.
And it's because there was so much talk and so much marketing push. For it.
Yeah, we had 2+ years of, and it was weekly. And again, this is something that we were very proud of as we were doing it. Like every week, we had more stuff that we talked about, and new things, and new features, and new characters, and new planets, and all this sort of stuff. We did that for 2.5 years. But everybody stitches between the lines as well, and so they're like, well, they've said all this stuff. I can't imagine the stuff they're not telling us. We're like, actually, we told you everything. Yeah, that was it. That was it. Like the final week of that was the last thing. We just told you about all of it. Now play. It wasn't quite that bad, but like it's kind of what it felt like. I know, and the one that people always bring up is what the space game actually was. Like people had a dream of what they wanted the space portion of that game to be, and it was something that like from day one we knew we weren't going to do, but there was nothing we could do to stem the tide of expectation about that. Even saying some things ex cathedra that were fairly offensive to players didn't stem that tide. Yes.
So on that kind of note, back to maybe your process, how do you manage feature creep or with a sort of open structure here where everyone kind of can promote their ideas? How do you balance that?
I think they'd just lock me out of the room because literally, this is again no offense to producers out there, but our job is feature creep, and we're terrible about it. And so I try to come in, see what's going on, give my opinion, and then when people start talking about cool other ideas, I step out of the room because rational people like Brian and Gabe are able to start talking about the trade-offs, say, hey, that's a really cool idea. Do you know what that's going to cost? That means that we're not going to get this feature in. And then Gabe, as the owner of the vision, says, oh, but that's the game. That's a core feature to the game. And so if we're going to push that out because of cool idea, we can't do that. And again, we try and have that conversation sort of openly and maturely so that if you're the person who has like this is your baby, like, I've always dreamed of a game that had this, we're not trying to crush dreams, but we want everyone to understand what the vision of the game is, and this is incumbent on Gabe to do and keep explaining. You have to explain it every week because we all think our own things. To say, actually, remember the vision of this game and the core of this game is this. So that's a cool idea. If you can prove to me how it augments what the core is, and it we can do a cost-benefit analysis. Not to sound like an accountant. No offense to accountants, but like you can have that discussion openly as long as you know that that's the discussion you're having. Guys, everything we're doing here has a cost. We are an independent company. We don't have the pockets of an EA to say, oh, what's another $10 million? Who cares? Have fun. We have to say, look, that's going to cost this much time, and therefore we're going to lose some features, we're going to lose some content. Is that a good trade-off? And generally speaking, thus far at least, I think it's worked out fairly well.
If I could quickly.
Sure.
Sorry.
Now we go to the back because I keep doing people in the front, and I apologize to people in the
Just
back.
a maybe clarification. So you mentioned like proving that process. So how does that? And you also iterate clearly rapidly. So
Yeah.
what does that look like?
What does what look like exactly?
Kind of proving an idea, proving or disproving an idea, whether in terms of its fit for the core or sort of like.
Well, it's this is the thing that this is a compliment to our engineers. The engineers allow design to prototype stuff, but they're waiting in the wings to, I'll put it in as nice a way as possible, to refactor whatever that idea is as soon as it looks to be a system, not just a one, right? And so the design team is tasked with prototyping all sorts of stuff. And they can do, and this is getting a little bit into Unreal, they can do crazy ass shit using blueprints. They can do all sorts of stuff. They can do things that no one was ever meant to do. And they can do it like within this self-contained scripting language that just goes. But the engineers actually have to build the real version of that system. And so, in fact, it's better the sooner they show it, right? The sooner they say, hey, I've got this thing going on, and then an engineer can sit down and say, what are you trying to create? Are you trying to create a system for, the example that I heard Brian talking about the other day, like doors. Like, are you trying to create a door opening system? If it's a door opening system that we're going to use 1,000 times in this game, cool. We see what you did. We're going to now create requirements out of that, and then it's going to become a feature that goes into our trade-off. Like, do we need doors or do we not need doors? That becomes the discussion. But the quicker you get an iteration out of design, and therefore give them the freedom to do that, the better. The thing that we don't want to happen, and apologies for getting back into Star Wars: The Old Republic, design, there was so much engineering work that had to be done for some fairly terrible reasons based on the technology we were building. For a long time, the designers just weren't getting any features, and so they hacked the crap out of everything. And it was a nightmare, both in terms of stuff that had to be refactored, as well as stuff that still lives in that game, and we have no idea how it's still running. There is stuff going on in the Old Republic that I know, probably you cry yourself to sleep tonight, Brian? Yeah, sometimes a little bit. And it was because we didn't have we didn't have the bandwidth, and it's crazy to say we didn't have the bandwidth, and we have 500 people working on the project, but we didn't have the ability to have a gameplay engineer come back in and say, what is it that you're trying to solve? Oh, really cool. Now I have an action item that I can take, because the engineers were so booked in stuff they had to do just to make the game run, that we couldn't do that. And so it's something that we've tried to make part of our process. Prototype quickly, get it in front of the engineers, and have the engineers go, oh, that's a one-off, you can totally do that in that way, that's fine. That's gonna be a system, we need to take it out and we need to make it something that scales and works, securely, et cetera. At the back, yes.
Hi, first of all, Dallas and Gabe, I just want to thank you guys for coming out tonight and giving us some of your time. That's really great. My question revolves around, and it's really great that you guys working on the Old Republic, because it's a game that also experiences, as you mentioned. There are a lot of games coming out now, like Battlefield 4, Divinity, even Final Fantasy 14 and ESO, to name some MMOs, where a year after release, they are almost completely different, or either completely different or heavily augmented from their original release date games. Does that in any way change the release schedule for you guys whenever you're looking at potentially re-releasing, or you can say like a second launch of a game, and how much does that play into like post-patching after release date?
Well, I would say, first of all, we never intend to make a game that is so big that we can't ship the game, and that's exactly what we did with the Old Republic. And I don't mean any offense to I have a lot of friends who worked on ESO. In fact, a lot of our team went and worked on ESO. But when you're making a game that is intended to compete with a game that had 6 years of development and then 10 years of runtime, you can't compete with the feature set. And that is what we tried to do with the Old Republic. We said, wow, we're gonna be WoW, only better. And that was it was bonkers. And so we were in the position where we shipped something that it was actually, like, pretend that WoW doesn't exist, it was a fairly good game, but because it didn't have all of those things, we were way behind. It took us 6 months to get in some of the sort of like matchmaking, find a group stuff, which but it didn't fit. It didn't fit the schedule. So what we're trying to do is never do that again. We're trying to make a much more focused experience. We're trying to make something where the feature set for the game is what we release with. Like we have some ideas for like post-launch features, some things that might be nice bells and whistles, other additional things. But we want to release a game that is at its core the game, and that content is certainly part of what goes on, because any live service has to have sort of whatever your schedule is. People do it differently. Some people do weekly stuff. Some people do monthly stuff. Some people do like big chunks of DLC every 3 to 6 months, whatever. Our cadence is something that we have to figure out and exactly what we do there. But we want to be in mostly the content business there. We want to be in a place where engineers are still optimizing and they're doing stuff. But I want the engineers to actually be working on the next thing. I want them to be building our next technologies that build game number 2 or a sequel, whatever it is that we do as a next project. I would love to be able to separate that, and it's a challenge though, because the scoping thing is I think the hardest part of any game development. It doesn't matter what kind of game. You can be making the smallest phone game. There's all the cool shit you want to put into it, and you need to, like, day one cut that in half. Yes?
So I wanted to ask you about your experience, I guess, starting and running a new studio. So one of the things that I heard you talk about was that there were a number of things that you didn't like in terms of culture from your previous employer. But then something that I've heard from other people that I've known that have gone and started their studio is that they have these things that they didn't like in their previous job, but then when they went and started their own studio, they found out that some of these were kind of necessary evils. Have you had that experience, and if so, in what?
So, necessary evil, do you want to stand up?
I don't know, it kind of I thought he was pointing towards
I know,
me.
exactly.
Kind of stumped,
You can feel it searing in the back of your head. I say that jokingly, but
honest feedback.
It really, the thing that I would have missed is the support of having someone who really understands finance and business. I don't understand finance and business. I can talk about, like, I know what profit means, kind of, but I kind of don't. We had a whole conversation about that today. We're talking about our tax prep, and I'm like, how do we book these things? And like, I'm asking, in many cases, ridiculous questions. So there are the resources that were available to us for EA, and also when I worked at Sony Online, and I know that at some of these other places. They are tremendous. They can bail you out. In some cases, they are a crutch. And this is the thing that I know Gabe and I had some spirited conversations about, where there's a thing that we just decide, oh, but we really need that, and sometimes you just don't need that. Sometimes you need to, and it sounds like a cliche, but like, if you're only given these two tools, you're gonna solve the fucking problem using these two tools. And that's actually your job. It's your job as a creative person. It is your job as a designer, as an engineer, as an artist. So when I come to you and say, I like talking about hats because I think Team Fortress's business model is amazing. But like, if I go to my art director, I'm like, hats, they're the thing. I want him to go, how do I make 1 million hats? I'm gonna figure out how to make 1 million hats using one artist for a week. Like, do it. Like that's the kind of problem solving that I want us all to participate in, and it's new because it's culturally not what we were used to. The joke about the Old Republic is that there was a money hose, and there literally was a money hose. Okay, not literally. I totally misused the word literally, but there was a figurative money hose. There was literally a figurative money hose, where we just said, we're like, guys, if we're gonna get this done. I'm sure many of you have seen the film The Professional, the French film where Gary Oldman says, "Bring me everyone," and then he screams, "Everyone!" Like that was a meme we passed around for a few weeks when we were like, shit, I guess we need everybody. And so that was great, and it meant that we actually got the game out, and oddly enough, we had maybe one of the smoothest technological launches in MMO history, which is horrifyingly shocking to those of us who saw where we were 6 months prior to launch. And hooray! But we did that because we weren't constrained in one very particular way. We were constrained in a couple of other ways. There was a sort of amount of content that we were disallowed from going underneath. There was a feature set we were disallowed from going underneath, and so the only option we had was throw money at it. We're trying not to do that, and it helps actually to have Jason sort of riding herd on us when I say, yeah, the artists have just said that they want this stuff, and you'll see, okay, well, what are they going to not get then? Oh God, I guess we need to problem solve there. You were about to.
Yeah, I got a question back on the culture thing. I've been involved in high tech for a few years. And scaling a Google up to 53,000 people, or Facebook, in 2007 they were at 450 and they went up to 12,000 from 2007. And talking about culture, and by the footnote, there's a great book called Work Rules by Laszlo Bock, the head of whatever they call him, operations talent at Google, on all of this. Really unique culture. But the game industry is the only, I think it's the only industry I can think of where there are more women in a Catholic monastery than there are in the game industry or any game company. When you talk about culture and balance and all this stuff, what are you guys gonna do, or have you thought about this gender imbalance? It's not even like work style. It's just this radical, I can't think of any other industry that doesn't have this sort of gender balance.
Yeah, it is something, and I'll fully own that. Like we're just as bad as everybody else thus far. We finally have two women who've joined the company, but that's 2 out of 30. In terms of persons of color, we have we have a couple of Asian developers, but I know that I don't mean to denigrate, like Asian doesn't count, but like in our industry, it's not where the problem lies. So it is a place where we haven't had the success in terms of even the resumes coming in.
Is that it? Is it a attraction and talent attraction?
Yeah, and there's, I've read white papers on, but I don't know how to fix the problem of what is the tone of how we present ourselves. I wrote a lot of the content for our website, and then I've talked with people who work in this space of sort of like having more accessible language, and I've violated a bunch of those principles. Some of it I was able to correct. It's one of those things that, as gamers, we think like, work hard, play hard, that's the thing to say. And all the studies show that if you say work hard, play hard, women close the door and close the browser, because it sounds like douche bro culture. And we try not to be douche bros. No offense. He's gonna actually kill me. I don't know. When he stands up, you just know how much danger I'm putting myself in.
Did you just cut his budget today?
Exactly. No. He has control over so many ways to hurt me. Yeah. But it's a real thing, and it's a thing that we're unconscious of. The term microaggression is a thing that I talk about and I think about. And I probably fail at, because it's the way that I've been culturally brought up, and it's how I've operated, and it's how I've operated in this industry. I made a reference earlier to this industry is barely in its adolescence. Like, holy crap, the shit I've seen. Cut back to 10 years ago at Sony Online Entertainment. Like, woo! There's some pretty offensive culture stuff going on, and so. We're doing what we can, but thus far it has not been that successful in terms, as I said, like, you see it just in the resumes, in the number of resumes that I've had. And I guess you can't see, you can usually see gender in a resume. I would love to do gender blind resume review, but that said, like, of the women who've applied, we've actually hired a number of them. The percentages of hire versus resume have actually been fairly high. We just haven't seen a lot of resumes, and when we've actually brought people in for interviews, when you actually see that we have not seen a lot of people of color. I don't know what the answer to that is. I just know it's a problem, and it's something that I'm cognizant of, and I don't exactly know what the action is to take. Yes?
So what's your day-to-day life like in QC, and then also what methodologies do you use there?
Day-to-day life, we are, and this kind of goes to our try to have the wrong slide, but this try to hire adults culture. Like, it is a fairly relaxed atmosphere. We actually try to one of our policies is you can kind of work from home whenever. Your life can actually be the most important part of your life. So if you have a soccer practice that your kid has to go to, you leave whenever you need to leave to take care of that. If you have a doctor's appointment, you need to do that. There's unlimited PTO. We're not tracking those hours, and we're not judging people based upon were they there during core hours and all that sort of stuff. So we're trying to culturally be that open and relaxed and adult. We want to trust people to do the work. Beyond that, I'm not sure what to say about our culture. It's a
to the flip side of that, we do have that kind of opportunity to work from home and everything else. But the flip side is, you still got to get your work done.
Yeah.
And as long as you get your work done, it's not a problem.
Yeah, and that's the empowerment and trust thing, right?
And the grown-up thing.
Right, exactly. Yeah, you make your commitments. So this maybe goes to your question about methodology. So we use some kind of form of agile methodology. I think everyone does, and people are like, we're firmly into Scrum, and no, you aren't.
You're just standing in a circle.
Right, exactly. So you know what we don't do? We don't do morning daily stand-ups. We did that a lot on the Old Republic, and at some point in time, it was explained to me like how much everybody hated that, so. We work on a sprint basis. We do sort of sprint planning. People make their commitments. This is the sort of the adult part of it, is like you make your commitments, and then that's what you're going to do that sprint. And if we get near to the end of the sprint, there obviously are reasons why reprioritization takes place, or why a task really does blow up in a meaningful way. But if it's just your work and you didn't get it done, then you better figure out how to get it done. And so we do sort of like 3-week sprints. We track everything in Jira. That's thus far proven to be a pretty useful and flexible tool. We're always I say we as though I do any of it. My development director is always kind of working with the various disciplines to try and modify the Jira workflow to make sure that it makes sense. Some stuff is very simple in that way of like it's a user story. There's a a product owner. The product owner can check off on it at the end and approve it and hurrah. A lot of the content stuff where many disciplines are contributing to something. It doesn't follow that same flow. It's like my part's done, but your part isn't there, and we need so we've had to create processes within Jira to make that work. But generally speaking, I at a high level then usually Gabe and Brian at a technological service level and sort of game vision level set what the milestone goals are. We have small milestones and major milestones, and so the major ones I try to hang a big theme on to say like this is this is all about this thing, and it's it's a method that I've heard a lot of people talk about. Like it's something you kind of like rally around and everybody can really understand. Smaller milestones we don't always do that because I used to try and do that as well, and it felt really false. Like this entire milestone is about character textures, like hooray! So we found a hybrid model that seems to work for us, but it's there is a combination of truly agile feeling stuff and things that drift more towards a waterfall, and that's the reality of game production. That some things drift in one direction.
Can I interject?
Please.
One of the things, being in the industry for a long time, but also being part of the, more of the structured side of it. And it's funny because when Rich and Gordon interviewed me for working at BioWare, we had a talk, and it was basically what is your methodology on actually, how you do your job. And I think that we have adopted I think all of us who worked in industries were afraid of structure. I mean, like a rigid structure, because we've all seen how dreams get crushed that way. I think rather we've tried to create an infrastructure, which is more of a foundation, rather than try to build the whole house. And I think we've been successful in that, and it also allows the creative types within the industry to actually blossom. As long as, Gabe keeps everybody on path, you wrangle everybody and herd all the cats, and then I take care of all the business side of it. But I think that just gives a great foundation for people to actually, follow things, and then just reel them back when they...
Yeah, there is a whole, again, I apologize for every cliche that spouts, because I know I've thrown a lot of them, but the trust but verify is a thing. And so the verification aspect of that is something that I think to some people maybe feels contrary to this whole, like, you're an adult, so whatever, we trust you all the way. But in the end, we have to verify it. In the end, we actually have to get to the process, to the place where we all feel it, we see it, we check the box, and we actually mark it off the list and put it in the done column. And so I think there's been a little bit of friction on that side, but nowhere near as much friction as I've felt in past places, mostly because in past projects and in past development environments, what ends up happening is people check boxes in order to say that their shit's done, rather than embracing the reality, sort of the holistic, is it really done? And so I've tried to be flexible as the gatekeeper on the completion end to say, okay, you actually did hit the spirit of this thing. Or we haven't finished it yet, but I'm not going to be a jerk about that because you didn't, this last little bit isn't done because you were doing the important work that is going to let us go ahead and go forward here. I'm not going to hold you to the letter because what I really don't want is for people to just check it in and say it's done and have done not their best work. Yes?
This is a question about, you might not like it because it's a little bit about marketing, but it's about the kind of...
I apologize. Actually, I really love marketing. I like to make fun of marketing as much as I like to make fun of finance.
I think it might touch a little bit on the Old Republic nerve as well, but what would you say is easier or better for the game developing industry as a whole? Making a game for a market or making a game for a community?
It's 100% the latter. That one of the mistakes, and again, I don't want to put this in marketing because I was as much a participant in this as anybody. One of the mistakes in the Old Republic was that we planned our game based on weird ass Venn diagrams of market sizes and overlaps. And we even like then had that drive our feature sets to some degree, where we're like, well, you know, we know that people really love story because of BioWare gamers, and we also know that people love raids because of MMO gamers, and therefore if we do 2%, like we did all sorts of in the final analysis completely batshit backwards creation of a market, and tried to aim a game towards that. And obviously that's a very extreme example just because of the size and scope of the game, where like and I don't mean to denigrate what the Old Republic is. It's actually a great fucking game, and it's a really good MMO, and I feel very proud of what we did there. But the way we interacted with the market, and the way that we even talked about the game, was this like, everybody who likes this and this and this is going to be perfectly served by this game because we overlapped them, you know, Venn. What we are taking as our direction right now. So, you know, we might prove ourselves wrong here, but what we believe, and by we, at least Gabe and I, but I think you know, this is also the financial analysis aspect of what we intend to do, is we're trying to think of this game from the player's perspective. We're trying to think like, what do players really want? It may not be a thing that exists right now. You know, we aren't just going to say exactly like game X that's very successful, because that's the other thing that I think people do when they aim for markets. You know, the whole, if we can just get 1% of League of Legends market, we're going to be successful. It's really actually hard to get 1% of League of Legends market, especially if you're doing exactly what League of Legends does. And so, you know, a number of MOBAs have gone the way of the dodo because they tried to do just that. So we have an idea for a game, and we believe that there is a community out there of players, and it's a community that is it. We're not engaging them right now, right? We need to actually flesh out the game itself. But once we have the game in a place where we can show it to people, we believe that we're going to create. I mean, we believe we're going to create a market. Is you know, the ridiculous best case scenario, right? The best case scenario is like, yeah, a market will grow out of this because we think it's a great game, and we think it's a great game that we love to play, and that people that we know who come from different backgrounds will love to play, and that's what it comes from. It's, you know, it's ground up as opposed to top down is maybe the you know, the simple way of thinking about it. Who knows? Who knows if we're doing the right thing? But I know that when we've come at it from the other direction, it has felt really false, and it has felt like all the criticisms that players have of you know, corporately designed games, like we fell into all those traps when we came at it from that direction. Does that answer?
Yeah, I'd love that.
Please, yeah.
So, to be fair, both models actually work when you just look at successful like money making. They can, like Battlefield or Battlefront, for example.
Yeah.
To talk some crap on for me.
Right. But yeah,
it's just
succeeded as a
marketing. It's
business.
just the market is just serving, but then they really do what the community is asking for is another question. And then conversely, another great example is Dark Souls. Came out. Are you crazy? Are you going to make that game and you think it's going to make money? But it grew a community. It grew this whole like talking about at the water cooler, like, oh my God, I did this 1,000 times and finally I got past it, which sounded like crazy talk beforehand, but it built this community around it. Now it's this huge successful thing with spin-off type games of the same kind of genre they've made a community. So I think both can work and make money. Which one inspires us the most, of course, is the latter. It's the Dark Souls. It's coming up with some game type and building a community from that. Hopefully, I mean, because there's also the type, for every Dark Soul there's also, you know, many more that are made that are appreciated, maybe good, critically reviewed, but those don't necessarily bring a great community.
So a market can create a community, and a community can create a market.
No. I'm saying a community can create a market. A market, I don't know to say that can create a community, but if you target a market, you can definitely get a lot of people to pay the $50-$60 and then be upset.
Yeah, a market can create a successful product.
Yeah.
And again, there's nothing wrong with that, right? We are, after all, in the end, we're in a business, right? But it certainly is not the way that we're currently thinking about what we're developing. And this does go to the whole like, we founded a game studio because we want to be a game studio, and we want to live on and build a second game and build a third game and grow and do all of these things that, you know, where this is what we're doing for the rest of our careers. And I think that what we really don't want to do is I mean, you know, it would be, I guess, could be financially successful, but we don't want to be the guys who built that one game that made a lot of money and made everybody hate them. Not that's what anybody's goal is per se, but we would much rather start building a community who really likes what QC Games does. So that the time we built our second game, it's grown and like, as a business plan for the company as opposed to a business plan for the game is maybe a way to even think about it. Something
Like
backwards.
early, sorry, I'm sorry, I keep going. But like early Blizzard offering new gameplay types to the community, to the gaming community out there. That's like what excites me. Current Blizzard is, I mean, they still make quality products, but they're just making things from already established markets and putting it out there, more or less. So early Blizzard is what inspires a lot of us.
Yes. You.
Okay, hi. So you mentioned that this game has like sort of co-op elements, and obviously we've worked on MMOs before. What sort of unique challenges come with designing and testing for a game that a large portion of it depends on players interacting with each other?
Well, I mean, it is, and without getting into the details of the game, but like just the general challenge of building really robust, sort of active online services. It's the reason that, you know, no offense to the design team, it's the reason that the people who started first were Brian and his core engineering guys. That knowing how to build a really good client server architecture, knowing how to build a great service around that, and obviously it still depends on the design being one that inspires good interaction between players, but the technological challenge is a thing that, not to say that there aren't a lot of people who are starting to do this better and better, but it's the thing that our team has the most experience in, right? We know how to do that, and we can do some things, and I say we as though I do any of this, but we can do some things technologically that allow Gabe to have a freedom in what his design vision is, that I do believe are going to be fairly new and fairly impressive bits of technology combined with design, that are going to make for a really great cooperative experience, and stuff that other people just aren't doing yet. And it's based on the experience that we have with the Old Republic, with Warhammer and Dark Age, with even PlanetSide, which is a game that I worked on back in the day. 1, not 2. But it is, you know, it's the central underpinning of everything that we do, is understanding what online gameplay means. Because I guess online gameplay doesn't always mean at its you know, at its craziest and the super coordinated stuff that you have to do in a multi-party raid in an MMO, right? That is very end of the spectrum cooperative gameplay, and it's actually fairly inaccessible to a lot of people. And I think that, you know, what we're doing is I think a little bit more focused than that, because we understand it needs to be accessible, but leverages all of the things that make that, you know, that great interaction online to be fun. That was the vaguest answer. I'm so sorry. Without, I don't think I can really answer exactly without getting into details that we're not actually talking about yet. Yes.
So I'm helping my buddies start a game company, and finding talent can be tough. Like, we're searching for like a stream API developer. But like, how do you find good talent? Have you come across any secrets?
Secret number one is have a lot of people who you've worked with in the past who we had an unfair advantage in the core of my team, at least. All were highly experienced people who had worked together in this exact kind of environment. You know, as we've grown and we've started pulling in more people from outside of our core, it has helped that we have reasonable resumes and reasonable histories that I think attract people to us. I don't know that I have a good answer to that. Finding talent is, there are actually a couple of jobs that are on our list. It's always the wrong slide behind me. That we have kind of like run into a wall, and so but I'm doing the stuff that anybody would do. Is I'm talking with people who are in recruiting to say, like, hey, where do you go? You know, what are the best sites for doing this? What do you change about your job descriptions to make it clearer what it is that you're doing? So I'm doing all of those things, but I can't tell you what's worked yet, because we got all the people that we wanted, and now we've run into a couple of places where we need help, and we haven't solved those problems yet. Yes?
And I just wanted to reiterate that in the hiring process, one of the biggest assets that you can have is your network, especially when you have a startup. I've been operating my business for 3 years. The most opportune time I've had for getting talent has been all of the people that I've branched off to that I've known over the 22 years I've been in this industry. If you don't have that, it's a little bit of a gauntlet. And I think that's an important thing to actually message to everybody, is that it is very hard to hire talent if you do not have a network.
Well, and it really is, it's a thing that's hard for, I think, a lot of us. I'm maybe more of an extrovert than is necessarily the average within the games industry. A lot of people in the games industry are introverts by nature, and doing stuff like this, like you may not today feel the like the immediate impact and value of it, but it's actually how you develop that network. And it's something that I say I'm an extrovert, I also don't like to do. I don't like to go and network, and so my network has grown over the years, but it's because I've been doing this for a really long time. The more you can network actively, the better.
This guy might know a bit about network.
Point me up. He had his hand raised.
Yeah, one of the things about the meetup that, I mean, we've got, I haven't even looked lately, probably 700 people have signed up. And some of the profiles are like, you know, one-liner, half a tweet. And that's a great place to look people up. I mean, it's much better if you're living in Austin than LinkedIn or anything else you can think of. So I would encourage you to look at some of the other profiles. And actually, I'm going to send it out. Everybody should improve their profiles to improve this speed dating thing that you're looking for.
Yeah. Folks in the back still. I'll come to the front, back in a second. Yes.
I know you've been kind of picking on the marketers a little bit, so I'm trying to jump over here with the finance guy.
That's right.
And endure some of that fire with them. But as far as retaining key employees, what sets your studio apart from other studios as far as benefits, or how do you retain the people that you get in, so you do find the quality engineers and artists that you was talking about earlier, as far as when you're finding your good prospects, how do you maintain it?
Well, so far it's all about culture. It really is that, and you know, we've only been around for a while, and so therefore we have zero turnover, I say, and then I knock on something desperately. We're a startup, so we don't actually have the like we'll drop fat bonuses on you and do all sorts of that kind of stuff. There are a lot of studies that actually show that doesn't work, or that it only works in the short term. It actually creates more of a problem, and I'm not saying this just so I don't have to pay you more money, Gabe. But like there are a lot of weird psychological things that go on with us and compensation. That you know, the best thing you can do is to create an environment where people feel empowered, where they feel like it doesn't matter what discipline you're in. What we as people like to do is we like to solve problems, and again, there are various books that call this other thing. They call it mastery. Achievement of mastery is I think a big buzzword that people talk about in terms of like the great cultures and great business cultures. Is if you put people in a place where they can achieve mastery, they're going to want to stay there, because that means they're getting to. But what it just means is solving problems, and getting to own that they solved them. And so it's honestly. It is the underpinning of everything here. We want people who are engaged in problem solving, not just because we want problems to be solved, but because we know that that's what keeps them engaged as parts of the team. And if they know that I just threw one on you and I need you to create a solution, Ariel, this is your budget for getting the music done in the game. Figure it out. He has to figure out how to work with, you know, the assets that he has, the money that he has, but also the connections that he has in order to come up with a solution. And by the way, this is Ariel, he's our audio director. And when he comes back with a solution, and it's a solution that utilizes the resources that Jason's approved for him, hopefully he feels a bit of like, got it, I nailed it. And that problem solving thing at its root is the thing that motivates us all. And so that's what we're trying to do. We don't want anyone to feel like their job is to walk in, see their task list, and just do that stuff until they're done. And like, oh look, it's lunchtime, and go have lunch, and then again, this is that is also, it's a fine way to run a business, but it's not a way to grow a culture, and it's not a way to grow a company. And so that's our intention. That's what we're trying to do, is to always provide people with those opportunities so that we can be in a place where 3 years from now I can say, we still have a 0 turnover rate. That's insane and it's impossible, but we do, and it's because we've tried to create those opportunities for people at every turn. Yes?
Question that I'll ask just on behalf of everyone here and other people who have been here. I get it all the time. Okay, I don't know JavaScript, I don't know Unreal, I'm not a programmer, and I don't draw robot cartoons. I didn't start doing that when I was 3 or 4. I'm a soup. I want to do marketing, I want to do business dev, I want to produce maybe, even though I don't know how to do either of those two things. How do I break into this business? And that doesn't have to be in terms of your company.
Yeah.
Get that question all the time.
So the classic ways in, if you are, and I always tell people that I'm a person without skills. The classic way in is the QA route. It is not to say that QA is not a place that is a skilled position, but it's a place where, like, coming in and showing that you can organize your work, optimize your work, think about processes and improve stuff. Like, that's where the producers who don't come out of, there are producers who were failed engineers and there are producers who are failed designers. I'm a failed designer. There are actually producers who come out of art as well, and I'm not sure how they get there, other than that they found out they were better at organizational stuff than they were at the actual art. So it's the same thing as being a failed designer. But if you don't come from one of those disciplines, then QA is a way in. There are sometimes actually on the sort of operations and the sort of the business side, there are ways in, but it comes in through administrative stuff, working even within, I'm sort of like, there are parts of Jason's job right now where at some point in the future we're going to hire someone who's more entry level. The idea is, though, we're not going to hire somebody whose only job is to be doing administrative tasks. We want to hire somebody who actually has that business mentality, who can ramp up into doing more businessy things. Now,
it comes down to fundamentals.
Yeah.
I mean, do you have the fundamental skills, whether you've actually been trained in them or you just have them inherently? That's
right.
what it really comes
But
down to.
there's no reason that the person who comes in through that path couldn't then move towards marketing and business, and there's no reason that the person who comes in through the QA path is the prime one, but who couldn't move on into production. I will say that the bigger a business is, sometimes, well, it's a mixed bag. Sometimes it's harder because a company like EA, they're big enough that they don't hire anybody who doesn't have 4 years of experience or 5 years of experience in that particular discipline to go into finance, to go into marketing, to go into business analytics. With a smaller company, that's where the opportunity lies. We have hired people because we know they can cover 3 jobs, and that does mean that they have 3 jobs that they have to do, and we try to balance that out, and so you're not doing 3 full-time jobs, you're doing parts of 3 jobs that, but that is a way in. But it is harder. It's harder for the unskilled to actually get into that place, because musicians, Ariel was a musician who just also happens to be very good at organizing and leadership, and that's how he moved to where he is. But you started out as a music guy and a sound guy, right? And I'm not sure what gave you started as a story guy, kind of.
Screenplay editor in Hollywood,
yeah.
and then, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But it's a weird story.
Well, that's because 15 years ago it was entirely different.
Yeah.
Like, there was no such thing as design degrees.
Right.
Right. So it's like to talk about, like, sort of how we got in versus the way to do it now.
Right.
It's
So,
a bit different.
Right. The right way to get in is to do what Wilson did, which is to go and get a design degree and have a great portfolio that we can then look at and go, holy crap, this guy's doing some amazing design work. Yeah. That's great. But yeah, that didn't exist for us.
For design, but production, I don't know.
Yeah, the producers come through those programs as well, and certainly at the point at which we have more more junior opportunities, and certainly I'm going to talk with folks who have come through those programs. Yes.
Let's see, the introductory word. So you had a great vision at the start with a great bunch of guys that you worked really well with. And I assume it was like, wouldn't this be great if we could just do this? And then transitioning to the point where you have the resources that you can do that. And okay, now we've got all our stuff together, and here's what we want to do with it. How did you get from point A to point B, besides luck?
Luck is the answer. No, so prior to us actually getting funding of any sort, it was mostly me talking to people and pitching and going around and doing the dance, because I guess that's what I do. So I'm not totally unskilled. I can dance. Exactly. I think that a lot of it goes to I had a lot of connections, so the people that I could talk to, at least, I had a broad spectrum of folks to reach out to, and because I've been around for a long time, so I know this is not useful information in many ways, right? It's like, wow, you have to have been making games for 15 years and know people at every single publisher, and that way you at least get the 30 meetings that I started with that went their way down to this. Like, sometimes the hardest part is getting that first meeting. So I don't know, other than we were in a lucky position, and I knew enough people that of the 30 that started, 3 or 4 actually turned into a real thing, and we were able to even have some choices as to which direction we went. But as I said, it's not necessarily practical, useful information, because I know that I'm coming from a very specific set of circumstances. I think that it helped a lot, and this is just as hard, but it's different. It helped a lot that I could present not just a vision for what a game could be, but I could present at least the core of a team. I will say, actually, so I did a startup before, in between Sony Online and when I went to work for BioWare, and it did not work very well. And it didn't work very well mostly because I didn't actually, I had a guy who was maybe going to be my lead design guy, and I had a guy who was maybe going to be my art director, and I had a guy who was kind of going to possibly be an engineer, but we weren't a coherent group who I could point to what we'd done together. And we didn't have a coherent vision, and I wasn't also very good at talking about what it was that we were going to do. So the vision and the idea is one thing, but in many cases it was a representation. It wasn't actually anything that I could show on paper, but I could at least talk about what my team was going to look like, and because I knew it to be true, I wasn't bullshitting, right? My sense is, if I had been bullshitting, people would have known. People would have known that, like, oh yeah, you say you're going to hire a really awesome AAA team of guys, but will you? But because I knew that I would, and that it was actually going to happen, I was able to say that with confidence. But
I have one more question. There's a guy that raised just a boatload of money for a company in Silicon Valley, and I forget which VC firm he went into, and he presented a really tight plan,
Yeah.
and the venture capitalist looked at him and said, I think you're confused. And he just looked at him and said, this meeting is over. We may be wrong, but we're not confused, and slammed and left. They got the money.
Yeah.
Another question or two? We gotta wrap it up.
Yeah.
Okay, how about,
what do you do? People who have not gotten a chance to.
Yeah.
You've already asked?
I have also.
okay.
Anyone who hasn't asked? who
Make
wants
up a
it?
question.
There we go.
Yes.
What's your ideal company size in terms of employee count? How do you project, what happens when you get to that?
So our current ideal count, and for the next several years, we want a stable of 50 people. I think that the only time we would want to go above that is when we have a second project. I believe very strongly that, and there, whatever random studies that do other, give slightly different numbers, but there is an inflection point where communication fails, and it's somewhere around there. In fact, it's probably above. You can probably successfully go above that, but I would rather stay shy of that number. It's something that I experienced on the Old Republic. When I joined, it was maybe 90 people, and I could mostly keep track of what was going on and actually know who everybody was.
Right.
Across 100 people, I stopped knowing people's names. Like, I knew most people's names, and I would kind of be able to guess, and I could, if you gave me a minute, I'd be like, well, by process of elimination, that must be Ed. But I've seen his name on emails, and I can't put a name to a face, so it's got to be him. But that was too big, and so I think that on a per project basis, going any bigger than 50, honestly, I would love to stay 40 or less, is what I think is the sweet spot. If and when we go to project 2 and project 3, I can see that growing, but sort of the atomic unit of team size, I don't ever want to see bigger.
Is that including QA?
That's not including QA, and like we do some outsourced art, and so the total number of people working on the game can be more than that.
Okay.
But they are not fire and forget per se, but like there's a single point of contact within the company that can maintain that relationship. That it doesn't matter as much culturally whether the 6 artists who are working in a foreign country on this are actually guys that that I know on a first name basis.
Yeah, 50 seems to be the perfect.
What are some other ways that you boost a positive company culture other than playtesting and critiques?
I mean, some of it is just like soft casual stuff. Like it's a silly thing, but like we have tacos every Friday, and it's just a thing. And we have snacks, and the bottom line cost of providing your employees with some basic snacks and drinks is not that much, and it actually means something. If everybody who wants to get a soda in the middle of the day, and again, we're talking about, we have some resources, so it's not always possible to do these things, but that feeling, if you don't have the money to do it, talk about doing potlucks and have everybody like be part of that culture. I think that there are ways to have that same feeling of like, hey, we're here, and it's a fun thing that we're doing, and we have some fun perks. We go out to beers together. It doesn't mean that it's always on the company dime, but we should. And so we try to do that. It's something honestly we need to do a little bit more of. We had to move offices. We've done a bunch of kind of large structural things over the last 7 months, but I think we've kind of gotten into a more settled spot. But we can do more of that. And we've just been talking about putting art on the walls. Like, we don't have any art on our walls. Our walls are really bare, and it feels kind of antiseptic. We're going to get some art on the walls.
You forgot to mention a push-up club, dude, bro.
We do that.
Yeah, it's because I currently. That's right. Well, I don't currently do it because I've hurt my wrist, and then I feel sad because I'm next to Wilson, and he's like doing like 6 of them and like clapping and doing all this sort of stuff, and Ariel and I are kind of crying while we do it. But yeah, we do have this thing that happens in the afternoon most days where we kind of get in a circle, and whoever wants to participate, we all do push-ups together.
And that $150,000 slide you're putting in.
Exactly.
Okay, so we're gonna have to wrap this up now because we have to get out of here. This is how it looked when you came in. Every seat was lined up, like the Third Reich was in charge of this room. The other thing is, will be a Buffalo Billiards. And for the people that had jobs that are looking for people, tell me and I'll get those out. Oh, thank you. Thank you. Standing ovation.
All for you, Jason. It's all for you. Awesome. Awesome. I appreciate it.
It's on their minds. I want to contact you to do a podcast.
Oh, I have awesome. Yeah, I would happily do that. I don't think I'll be a Buffalo Billiards to.
Yeah, okay, cool.
I also do audio. I look up on LinkedIn, they have like 30 mutual friends.
Well, most of the people on our team, right? Most of the and the marketing people. So I'm a bad
You gotta, part of the, clean up the room and leave it, because we gotta be out of here.
Oh, no. I was not here. I figured there's a long chance. I know it's the hardest thing in the whole life.
From LA, so like they were so spread out. Yeah, nobody get in because they're already working in the area. Today is a 1 week.
Brand new.
Brand new.
Oh yeah. So there's a game in town. Yeah. Well, let me give you my email address. I haven't actually been doing it, but it's consistent.
Because for us, that's consistent. Good.
And then Like my home is Phoenix, that's not where I've worked necessarily. Before I worked at QC, I was in BioWare, and then before I went to BioWare, I was at Calculation, which is a little bit less.
No, I'm thinking of something I've been.
We did like Saints Row.
Yeah, I'm thinking of the one that's in upstate New York, and they did one of the Guitar Heroes.
Yeah.
No.
Oh, yeah, go out to the desk, you get a little
Switch
card.
straight around. It was Vicarious Visions. That's why I got confused.
Oh, yeah.
Actually,
is it over to the left? There's a dude
Just at the
who's
main
working
desk.
there.
Okay.
Yeah,
I know that dude.
Byron Ward?
The name sounds familiar, but I don't.
It's like if you come in before 6, apparently it doesn't work, and I did that, so we'll see tonight.
Because it said, I don't know if I parked in the right place. I think it said $10 because I parked like in the bottom section.
Yeah, the omelet, right? Yeah. Yeah, well, get out there and get one, because I think she's standing right there. Okay, let's clear it out. Out of the room. Texas, gotta do a cattle drive.
How much operational? You get an operation.
Yes.
Wow, I'm impressed.
So I would love to say yes, but I need something to name. So that's kind of like number one.
This will be like, we're just looking at one event right now, a dinner sort of thing.
Do you know Katie Amel? Kathy, yeah, sorry.